Thank you very much. I will now call our final speaker, Tom Newton Dunn. Tom Newton Dunn, in case you didn't get the message, works for The Sun. He was for many years a defense journalist and a foreign reporter, but since 2009 he has been The Sun's political editor. You might think of him as an unlikely defender of New Labour, but nevertheless, Tom, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, obviously stand to oppose the motion. I'm the last one of the night, so this will all be over very soon. First of all, briefly, thank you for having me back. Third time I've spoken here. It's a deeply cathartic experience to be asked to Cambridge at any stage, certainly to speak, because a long time ago I applied to study at Keys and I was rejected. So that wasn't just the tragedy. The real tragedy was I was the first, I think I'm correct in saying it, in 5 generations of Newton Dunns not to be accepted into Keys to study. I had to go to another university instead. So my forefathers up there somewhere are now looking down on me as I atone for my sins of not being clever enough to study where you study. On to the motion. I'm going to address this one slightly differently to my 2 excellent colleagues who both made very good speeches explaining precedent. Sorry, my 3 colleagues who made very good speeches on why New Labour should not be regretted. But I'm not just going to tell you why the New Labour government itself wasn't particularly such a bad thing. I could spend a long time, as my colleagues, 3 colleagues, have just said why the New Labour government was actually okay. There were many mistakes that the New Labour government made. That's not quite the point of this motion, which is, of course, this House regrets New Labour. The mistakes have been covered in a bit. I won't go over them again. Too little financial regulation clearly contributed to the mess that the government got into 2008 with the financial crash. They ignored the downsides of globalization too much, didn't control immigration enough, sent to the views of most people in the country, lost control of welfare spending. They did massage the crime figures. I'm sure that's absolutely correct. Christian makes a very good point. Disastrous PFI projects, they sold off the nation's gold, and then there was the hotly disputed topic of the Iraq War, which I thought Sam gave an excellent defense of. I covered the Iraq War, and I back up everything he said. I watched people getting liberated. I walked behind tanks without sounding like a boring war bore. I watched people come out of their houses saying, thank you very much for getting rid of that tyrant. That couldn't have been a bad thing. I'll accept the point.
Well, when you were listing all of the failures of the New Labour government, I was wondering if you wanted to swap places with me.
Very kind offer. Unfortunately, my speech isn't in there. So look, they got a lot wrong. Every government gets things wrong. Every government makes mistakes. They also got a lot right. And whenever you think about everyone's got a personal complaint about the New Labour government. What did they do? What they didn't do? And it's like the Monty Python sketch, The Life of Brian. What did New Labour ever do for me? Eh? You're familiar with that. What did the Romans ever do for me? Well, the minimum wage. Right. Okay. Well, apart from the minimum wage, what did New Labour ever do for me? Well, peace in Northern Ireland. Okay, apart from the minimum wage and peace in Northern Ireland, what did New Labour ever do for me? I won't bore you, but you could say, as my colleagues already touched on, maternity pay, paternity leave, sure start, more people than ever at universities, working tax credits, Disability Discrimination Act, devolution of Wales and Scotland, civil partnerships, the first ever Climate Change Act, as Vince touched on, Kosovo as a nation was saved, Sierra Leone as a nation was saved, homelessness was cut by 2/3, and rough sleeping was cut by 3/4. But apart from all that, what did New Labour do for me? You get the message. The best epitaph of the New Labour government by anybody, I thought, was actually from a Conservative Prime Minister, one David Cameron, who, when elected, stood on the steps of Number 10 to take up office in May 2010 and said these words: "Compared with a decade ago, this country is more open at home and more compassionate abroad, and that is something we should all be grateful for." But it's not the record of the New Labour government you need to vote on tonight. That's the small part of this motion. You could be voting on this motion because you thought New Labour were cool. And I need to slightly go back a bit in a time machine now, because I realize that most people in this room weren't actually born when New Labour were elected in 1997. You've got to be 23 to have been born in 1997. I accept I'm one of the few who actually was. So Labour is Blair is through this sort of time there's a retrospective at the moment where everything they ever did was bad. And they were has-beens, they screwed it up, and we've heard some passionate arguments on the other side explaining why. I just want to put you, just for one moment, into the position, what it felt like. I was alive, I was actually 22 at the time when New Labour were elected, May the 2nd, 1997. Amazingly beautiful summer's day, not a cloud in the sky, nice and warm, and Blair took to the stage of the Royal Festival and said, and I'll get this absolutely right, "It's a new dawn, is it not?" Yes, that point.
Is there not an argument to say that that's more to do with the failures of the Conservative Party? This has been in power for 18 years and looked old, sluggish, unable to govern anymore. And that's really the same situation Labour was in 2010. How does that make New Labour, in particular, such a great thing?
A very good point. I'm just about to come on to it. You prompt me exactly. Perhaps you come join us too. It's excellent, this help I'm getting. You have to put New Labour, to regret New Labour, you have to really say, I'd like the John Major government to carry on. That's the historical perspective. That Major government was dire, sleaze-ridden, it lost its majority, it was full of awful bickering about, guess what, Europe. The Conservative Party still haven't lost that particular habit. And suddenly, along came New Labour. They were really cool. I'm told by my 10-year-old son that no one says cool anymore. I'm probably, sick now. Anyway, they were sick. And they were, these people, right? These people had parties in Downing Street. Tony Blair had a party in Downing Street. He invited the Gallagher brothers. They went to the lavatory and took vast amounts of cocaine while they were at this party. It probably wasn't intended to do. Mick Hucknall from Simply Red was there. Ross Kemp, who was the great TV star at the time in EastEnders, was, everything they did was really cool. It was a zeitgeist. Cool Britannia was happening at the same time. Blur and Oasis were battling it out for number one, and it is all much ancient history for anyone any much younger than me. But these people nailed the zeitgeist, and that was a special thing at the time. If you voted for them, if you were part of a society that felt wasn't represented, particularly by Thatcher and Major, suddenly these guys came along. It was extraordinarily inclusive. Beg your pardon? On that point, yeah?
I think, would you say that, sorry, do we have a microphone up there? We have people on the live link and they can't hear what he's saying.
So would you not say that was part of the problem with New Labour? They were too obsessed with trying to keep up with the zeitgeist and PR, and therefore sort of sold their soul to the press, like yourself.
Yeah. I could turn out my pockets and show you I've gained financially in no way whatsoever from, just on the point Emily made about Murdoch, Mr. Murdoch, as I respectfully refer to him as, of course. If you followed recent events any time in the last couple of years, you might realize that Rupert Murdoch and Tony Blair had a pretty spectacular fallout. I won't go into the precise detail here, but it involved, in fact, I'm not going to say it at all, because it's certainly more my job is worth. Can I just quickly address that point head on? The idea, because it's been made by the opposition as well, the idea that the likes of me and the press, the tabloid press, the right-wing press, whatever label you want to call us, that we sit and dictate to political parties what they have to do in exchange for some sort of unmentionable thing in this sort of Faustian deal is completely wrong. It just doesn't work like that. I've worked for my newspaper for 15 years. I've been its political editor for 10 years. If there was some sort of deal, some sort of backhanded, Faustian conspiracy, I'd have seen it. You've got to take it from me. It just doesn't happen. The thing about newspapers is, and I'll come on to this in a bit, what we do is we follow our readers. We are a capitalist proposition, filthy capitalist thing that Emily would disapprove of thoroughly. But we go where the sales are. So if the sales are for a certain political party, such as New Labour, we're going to go there. It's really not rocket science. The idea that there was a stitch-up, it just didn't happen. I hope I've answered that to some extent. Let me press on. So at the time, out went all those white men in their 50s and 60s in pinstripe suits banging on about Europe. In came all sorts of different people. It was extraordinarily liberating and inclusive. And fine, they tore the arse out of PR. They did it brilliantly. They borrowed the zeitgeist. They became Cool Britannia themselves. But, that's politics. They did that well as well. But I'm not asking you even to vote for the motion on that, although, I put it in the right perspective, I hope. So if it's not the government's record I'm asking you to think about here, and it's not the government's branding and their coolness I'm asking you to think about, although, my God, they were cool. It's something else. essentially, New Labour, and the Lord Hacking touched on this, I think, quite well, was more than all of that. The very core of what New Labour was about was a philosophy for power. That's what they did. They took an unelected party, they turned it around. It wasn't just Blair, it was Peter Mallinson and Kinnock before Blair, and Alistair Campbell, and Philip Gould, the pollster, the whole load of different people doing all this. And they made a party electable, and they got it into power. How did they do that? What was the defining nature of New Labour? Three things. One, governing from the centre, borrowing bits from each side. Two, unashamedly aspirational. And three, unifying people, trying to get people together in the centre ground, the third way, whatever you want to call it. But it was trying to bring everybody along, not dividing, as Corbyn does, as Boris Johnson does, not playing one side off against the other, but bringing everyone along together. The most important thing is they put themselves where the people were. Yes, they used focus groups and the like to do all the tricks they're accused of, but they gave people what they wanted, not what they thought the people should want. And that's the crucial difference, and what the current Labour leadership don't really follow at all. It's in Clause 1 of the Labour Party's rules. We exist to put ourselves into power. It's the single number one governing reason any political party exists. And guess what? It worked. They won 3 general elections on the trot. They actually never lost, because Gordon Brown wasn't really fighting on a New Labour ticket when he lost in 2010. And it's also why my party backed New Labour. Because, as I've just explained, the gentleman upstairs gave me a chance, they put themselves where the people were. We saw that. We went with them. When the people moved away, we moved away too. Another government got elected. It's really as simple as that. I rang Esther Campbell last night to get a few bits of bobs and information, some tips on what I should say. And I'm coming to an end here, you'll be pleased to hear. As Campbell, he did get into keys, by the way, lucky sod. Although he said last night that he didn't enjoy it very much because he spent much of his time here drunk and fighting people. Who'd have thought that about Alistair Campbell? Certainly not me. Anyway, what he did say is he said, this is brilliant timing because Tony's making a speech tomorrow. And it happened this morning. Blair did make a speech. He said, you should have a look at that. So I did have a look at that. And Blair made a speech to mark the 120th anniversary of the Labour Party, which was born next week, 120 years ago. And Blair characteristically made the point that only 2 people were born in that 120-year period who went on to win an election for Labour, and Howard Wilson is now dead. Clearly, he's the only one still left alive. But he was right. Over Labour's 120-year history, they've been in power for just over 30 of them. So they've been in power for less than a quarter of their entire existence. So what is the point, and I address this to the Labour, the hard left Labour criticism, the Corbynista criticism of Blair-Brown. What on earth is the point in having all these wonderful socialist principles when you cannot get anywhere near power to execute them? The point is completely non-existent. I'm going to finish with a quote from the master himself, as David Cameron and George Rawlins used to call him, Tony Blair, in his speech this morning. And it's true 23 years ago as it is now, and it's true for the left and right in every political party that there exists. And Blair said this: our mission is to take causes and make them practical, to say yes to the ambition and no to over-ambition, or the wrong ways of realizing it, to go to where the people are and show them how together we can do better, to root our actions in their reality, to root our actions in their reality. And that's the key to the whole thing. For all its faults, failings, vanity, and indeed cocaine abuse on the fringes, the New Labour project faced and embraced political reality, and they won by doing precisely that. The only people who should regret New Labour are their opponents who lost. So, obviously, please oppose this motion tonight, because to regret New Labour is to regret reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. I was glad that you repeated a New Labour tradition of repeating something Alistair Campbell had told a journalist in the chamber. It's a very nice addition and a little bit of tradition for us tonight. I'd like to thank everybody who spoke in the debate tonight. I'd also like to thank Iman, our executive officer, for her invaluable help, as always, with every debate. And before we finish, I should announce some of the events that are coming up. On Sunday, as usual, members can pop upstairs to read the papers and have some pastries as part of our Sunday mornings at the Union. Next Thursday, we'll be debating whether we think Brexit is a good idea with Christine Jardine, Ming Campbell, and Gisela Stewart. We were going to have Suella Braverman, but she got promoted to the cabinet in the meantime, possibly on the strength of being invited to speak here. Tonight, however, we will vote with our feet on this motion. As you leave this chamber, please think carefully about which door you go through. If you wish to vote with a proposition, go through the aye lobby, with the opposition through the no lobby. And if you feel that this debate has been rubbish or you've reached no conclusion, walk right through the middle in abstention. The results will be announced shortly in the bar. Thank you all very much.